In this tutorial, we'll look at and explore a very common recurring move we can see in adolescent players, the concept of the pelvis thrusting or the hips extending, depending on which reference system one wishes to use it. So they're very much the idea that as players move and rotate into impact, how that pelvis can thrust and move towards the ball, really then connected them with that kind of real change in shape of the spine. So often move into that very kind of curved, flexed, depressed, real kyphotic kind of spine position. Then also some other associational movements we can connect into that, for example, overactivity through hand and wrist, inactivity through neck, and then overactive through things like foot and ankles. So the idea of pelvis thrust is a very common recurring movement we can see in adolescent players, and really much of it connects back to because where they're at to that maturation development phase, they haven't yet being the keyword here, yet quite having the control in that kind of deep postural system, mainly the very posterior section, in essence, the muscles behind us. So in many ways, when looking at kind of developing younger players, we have to really improve their real global movement skills for sure. And that's obviously a huge priority, but then getting very precise. So often when you have a very precise question, it often needs a very, very precise approach. So in air, for example, when looking at that kind of pelvis thrust and that pelvis moving towards the ball, really developing that posterior, essentially the system behind us, which in many ways is what helps give that frame its shape and control the pelvis, and in essence, prevent the pelvis from moving towards the ball through impact. So on screen here, you'll see today a left-handed player. I've used this player particularly because, ironically, it's a very dark image. So I've done that purposely just to actually help also kind of also avoid the player's identity and also protect the player's identity. There's a reason why it's dark. It just kind of helps then keep the player's identity safe and secret, and also allows us still to see the full video. So if I move this player through swing, what's very evident is we take them through. Now, for sure, there's many things we can obviously look at, and rightly so, by the way, as far as how this young player moves. And a lot of it also connects back to just adolescent players. But as they move into impact, how much that pelvis thrusts and moves actively towards the ball, the real then change in shape in that spine. And I think we can see pretty clearly then the overactivity through hand and wrist, the inactivity through neck, the real change in shape in that spine. Now, really much of that goes back to many reasons. Often younger players using heavier clubs. So often when heavy clubs are used in a very maturing, almost immature skeletal system, postural system, they haven't yet got the control to support the weight of that club as they move through swing. Now, getting the right club spec for young players can be a bit like shoes, unfortunately. They actually only really fit for about 3 or 4 weeks because they're growing so quickly. And often when you go to the idea of PHV, peak height velocity, we can see real spikes and increases in growth in that kind of, in those growth phases, those growth cycles of the adolescent players. So actually clubs only then really fit them often for days and weeks rather than kind of months or years as it can be. So often the equipment can be very influential, typically when using very long, heavy clubs. That can really start to pull us into that position because of how much force they're being exposed to as they move through swings. So often we've got lots of force, a lot of centrifugal force in particular, pulling the club away from us for impact. They haven't got that control to pull back. So to give you an idea, I mean, this is kind of more aimed at kind of the professional male player, but to give you a scale, the club typically can weigh up to and around 95 kilos at impact. So the effective weight of the club through impact for a mature male player can be in and around 95 kilos. So in essence, unless we can actually pull back 95 kilos of weight, we'll start to see then these deformations and changes in shape in the pelvis and the spine. So it's a very common movement, connecting back to things like the equipment, the deep postural system, where they're at through that maturation phase, the high volumes of sport they play, and almost in some ways the expectations now being placed on younger players, the demands for speed. Speed is undeniably helpful. That we have to accept and acknowledge, and I certainly do on every level. It's the modern day golf, regardless of the gender, whether it's male players or female players, it's regardless. You know, the long, powerful players typically tend to win. But however, because there's so much now demand and expectations on speed, that can often come at real adaptations and deformations, and actually then things like pain and injury through those moments. Often when I talk about pain, I say to many players, pain can be a 5-year cycle. It's 5 years moving this way to one day suddenly go, God, my shoulder kind of hurts today. What have I just done different? Oh, nothing. The response can often be, it's 5 years moving this way. Then eventually on that day it goes, please stop doing that. So, but the challenge with younger players in particular, and also adults sometimes as well, until it goes wrong, they simply won't listen. So it has to break before they then engage and embrace the feedback. So it can be often a tough discussion to have.